I'm going to prove that Lin-Manuel Miranda and Shinichiro Watanabe share a brain cell, because the anime Samurai Champloo and the musical Hamilton are thematically siblings. Both are heavily influenced by music, explore their home country's history through that country's artistic medium, and have characters, both fictional and historical, that exemplify the hip-hop spirit. I sound so white when I say it that way. Sorry in advance. For those unfamiliar with Samurai Champloo, it takes place at the end of Japan's Edo period, likely around 1852 because Commodore Perry doesn't seem to have kicked in Japan's doors yet. Perry the Commodore? Like Hamilton, Champloo uses modern speech and writing styles to make history more accessible.
I'll take all you bitches on!
Without the song and dance. It's an episodic road story about the Outlaw Mugen, Ronin Jin, the orphan Fu, and their pursuit of the samurai that smells of sunflowers. More on him later. And during their travels, they run into a myriad of personal and political foes based on real people and events.
Alexander Hamilton.
No, not him. He'd been dead about 50 years already. To understand how Samurai Champloo is like Hamilton, despite taking place 80 years and 6,700 miles apart, we have to look at the artist responsible for them and the eras they take place in. So, why use rap in the first place? Hamilton originated from Lin-Manuel reading Ron Cherno's historical biography on Alexander Hamilton. I know, right? Who reads books anymore?
Books are stupid!
While meeting the author, Miranda said, "Ron, as I was reading your book on vacation, hip-hop songs started rising from the page. And I admit, as entertaining as Founding Fathers and rap battles over government debt sounds, and eventually was, 2016 me thought it sounded ridiculous. I was wrong about Kingdom Hearts as well, so maybe I'm just bad at predicting trends? But after listening to the musical, I find myself agreeing with director Tommy Kail, in that Alexander Hamilton was born into profound poverty, with no parents, no support, who used words to elevate himself out of those circumstances and then died violently because of those words. It's the story of Tupac or Big. Speaking of Tupac or B.I.G., Alexander Hamilton and his son, Philip, died young and due to beefs with other nascent Americans. Dueling as a form of conflict resolution was common, thus the song, The 10 Duel Commandments. Hamilton's survivor guilt pressured him to keep active, fearing he was living on borrowed time. His drive for a legacy, his mind to be acknowledged and preserved for the annals of time, all burn with the same inner fire that hip-hop does, even 200 years later. Again, I'm sorry, I am so white I get sunburnt at night. My need for SPF 1000 aside, that same visceral need for self-expression drives the plot in Champloo. The series isn't a 154-minute rap fest, but the Greek, wrong hemisphere, chorus of rappers and general themes align themselves to hip-hop. Champloo's setting, Japan's Edo period, was a time of extreme conformity and isolation. Basically, unless you were Dutch, foreigners weren't allowed to visit. Christians? Capital punishment. In that light, taxation without representation ain't so bad. I liken the Edo period to America's Revolutionary War. The years that followed led to the Meiji Restoration, a revolution where the Tokugawa shogunate was overthrown and a new government was put in place. It was downright American. But during the Edo period, Ronin, samurai without a master, roamed in greater numbers due to the shogunate's laws and activities, like confiscating fiefdoms and removing the samurai leaders. Oh, and that same government didn't allow them to take up a new trade either, so they had to become bodyguards or, in some cases, criminals.
Yeah, I guess you could say I've been a criminal since I was born.
If there's ever a historical need to F an era's police, I think this is a good one. And if you think I'm crazy for thinking this would lead to a crisis of self, let me pass the mic to director Watanabe.
One of the things that makes samurai and hip-hop very similar is that in the old days, samurai felt very strongly about representing themselves, and they would represent who they were with their one sword. And rappers today are also the ones who take one microphone and represent who they are.
A sentiment that's echoed in Jin when he refuses to barter his swords.
I'm sorry, but I can't simply hand over the embodiment of a warrior's soul to... Hey.
Relax.
There's an element of minority representation in hip-hop too. And through hip-hop, Hamilton and Champloo use that minority voice to make the crunchier parts of our histories more transparent. There's a lot of controversy around Hamilton's devotion to abolition. His mother owned 5 slaves at one point, he worked for Beekman and Kruger, a trading house that dabbled in some light human trafficking. The musical skirts this and highlights more of Hamilton's work to end slavery, but it also uses hip-hop to lend power to the voices of other abolitionists, women's rights via Angelica, Eliza, and the capabilities of immigrants, like the Marquis de Lafayette and Hamilton himself.
Immigrants, we get the job done.
And Hamilton's color-conscious casting comes from a desire that everyone be represented, because America is the melting pot. Or whatever metaphor they're using now. America's for everyone. Unfortunately, they don't dive too much into the issues of indigenous people. George Washington, a slave owner himself, rose to fame fighting Native Americans in the French and Indian War. Adds some not-so-fun context to History Has Its Eyes on You. But don't fret, Champloo has you covered by giving voice to their indigenous people, the Ainu. There's a 2-part episode about a member of the Ainu. His people were plagued by a disease, and rather than help, a sect of officials simply burned down their village. As for the overall history of the Ainu, does the term manifest destiny ring a bell?
Funny how that works, ain't it? We're from places that are nowhere near each other, but I'm familiar with the music you're playing.
As a separate form of terrible behavior, you might recall I mentioned Christians and execution earlier. That's not an exaggeration. And Champloo gives us a twofer in exploring the Dutch. We meet a Dutchman that professes to be Japanese despite, logic.
Check out the red hair.
While he ultimately gets a pass from the government officials because of his position in the East India Trading Company, the majority of the Dutch traders visiting had to stay on Dejima, an island off the coast of Nagasaki, specifically for Western trade. The second half of representation is that Joji here came to Japan because of a real book by Ihara Sakaku. If 19th century Holland was anything like the America I grew up and live in, you know, I can understand why this guy would vibe with that book. I cite these examples as a lead-up to the name of the series. If you're familiar with Japanese cuisine, specifically the Okinawan dish Chanpuru, it gives a hint as to the mixing of these different peoples. Like Hamilton, Samurai Champloo is a shakeup of history and the present. But I'd be remiss to dismiss our main characters. While maybe not all are a minority in their time and place, they are gangster through and through. Seriously, I am so sorry. Does it help to know I'm an 8th Italian? Now that I say that out loud, no, it does not. Moving on. Champloo's Mugen, like Hamilton, is from a contested string of islands to the south.
I come from Ryukyu, pal.
During this time period, these islands were tributaries to both the Japanese and the Chinese governments. Mugen effectively grew up in impoverished conditions like Hamilton. Unlike Alexander, Mugen, per Watanabe himself, is a little stupid.
Do you understand what I just said?
Nope, not at all.
Counter to Mugen is our Ronin, Jin. Classically trained and star pupil of a dojo, Jin is a solid stand-in for Burr. Stolid, calm, with a legacy to protect. His Ronin status is wrapped in spoilers, but his skill and prowess are the inciting incident about why Jin and Mugen are frenemies. The group's glue, Fu, is a little more nuanced in her parallel. She's kind of like Eliza Skyward, in that she's trapped in the political events and games that the people around her play. Like the Sunflower Samurai. Here is your obligatory spoiler warning for him. The Sunflower Samurai is Fu's father. He abandoned her family when she was a child in order to protect them, because he was involved with the Shimabara Rebellion, a real revolt by Ronin and Catholic peasants against the Tokugawa shogunate's policies and discrimination. The series gives us amazing clues along the way. Our Dutch friend warns Fu that the trinket she has should be kept out of sight. We later learn it's a skull of Golgotha. The sunflower is the other big clue. They're native to North America. Fu's father was out of place during the Edo period, the same time period the sunflower was introduced. Small or dainty things were the Edo aesthetic, so a foreign flower that grows several feet high would run counter to that. To avoid having his family being cut down for standing out, he disappeared. Samurai Champloo is a history nerd's dream, but even if the references, events, and people go over your head, the show is both entertaining and gripping enough to hold your interest. And if you don't care about history, the takeaway from Hamilton or Champloo shouldn't be stuffy historical facts. Maybe your way in is the idea that history is built from the lives of people like you and me. My great-great-grandfather hit Ellis Island in 1908. He had a life before America, just like his parents did too. But their decisions affected their lives and mine, just as my decisions, yours, and those of our leaders will too. History has its eyes on you and the choices you make, whether you end up being a Hamilton or just in the chorus. If you enjoyed our time traveling today, leave a like and subscribe. If you have a genre or a Western work you'd like compared to an anime, leave a comment below. And if you're ready to spit some words, swing a sword, and learn a bit of world history, you can check out Samurai Champloo on Crunchyroll and Hulu. For those that couldn't get a ticket, Disney Plus has you covered. You can watch Hamilton on that platform. There is an anime out there for you, and I am glad to help you find it. So after all this, please tell me you see me as an academic and not like this guy. Lie, if you have to.